Reading the news, the current state of VR, at least as a consumer market, seems to sit somewhere between cautious and dwindling optimism. Market research firm Omdia predicts a slump for VR sales in 2024 and 2025, before an estimated resurgence in 2026. While Newzoo's Tom Wageman, speaking with GamesIndustry.biz, saw steady growth for VR in 2023, but tempered that with lagging user retention. 2023 saw the release of two major headsets from industry leaders, Meta's Quest 3 and PlayStation's PSVR2, each garnering positive responses as hardware, but facing timid and unsure futures. What does this all mean for VR? Well, it could mean a lot of things. Many of them maybe not great. What attitudes are like at companies that have the biggest influence on VR is even tougher to tell, although there are some explicit examples of VR pessimism. Currently, Meta is and has been dominating the VR space. The Quest 2 launched as a convenient, relatively low-cost option for VR in a market that, to that point, I don't really think had any low-end standalone headsets with the backing of a company as big as Meta. Meta's VR division, Reality Labs, is known for absolutely lighting money on fire, but I also think that's been the point. Meta's most profitable product is advertisements, and for that, you need users. You can't give away hardware like the Quest 2 for free, but what you can do is sell it at a loss as many consoles are sold, hope to make up some cash on the back end with games, and perhaps most importantly, capture a large portion of the VR market. For Meta, games are a means to a much larger end, of one day making the company's tech an everyday device. I guess if you can't beat Apple at phones, you can reinvent the phone as AR glasses in an attempt to replace it. As someone who loves video games and loves VR, what worries me about Meta's VR dominance is that Meta is not a video game company. And I think it's worth asking, why have VR at all? As a device, what is a VR headset good for? Will VR replace computers someday? Will VR eventually transition into AR, making VR headsets obsolete? I don't know. What I do think is indisputable right now is that VR is an excellent medium for video games. Not an all-encompassing medium, and not a medium that can or should replace gaming on a flat screen, but one that lends itself to experiences that can't be replicated anywhere else. VR is not the future of gaming, but it is part of the future. And I think if we care about the future of VR as a medium for games, then it's important that Meta lose its outsized influence on the market. And this is where PlayStation comes in. PlayStation is in a strange position right now. After outselling Microsoft in the previous console generation, at least with regards to game consoles, Sony found itself in a similar place with PS5, which, after a slow start, has nearly sold at the same pace as the PS4. But Microsoft has pivoted, with its ongoing platform-agnostic evolution and the increasing ubiquity of game subscription services looking to be pillars of games industry strategy for at least the immediate future. And while PS5 has overcome supply shortages, it apparently hasn't escaped the long-term effects of that slow start. Meanwhile, PlayStation's forays into PC gaming have been a success, with franchises like God of War and Horizon finding secondary markets in a space PlayStation wasn't previously present. The odd man out here is PSVR2, which initially sold well but seemed to trail off, with Eric Lampole, SIE's head of global marketing, telling the Financial Times that VR was a challenging category, and that I think there was a higher expectation generally for what VR would do to gaming. PlayStation is not some virtuous game publisher out to explore and expand the bounds of human art and entertainment in video games. Its motives are mercenary. It's bound to the same parasitic, short-sighted decision-making that's burrowed itself in all major game companies. But with PSVR2 already up its sleeve, I think Sony has a real opportunity to capitalize on VR, a market that is currently underserved. The PSVR2 is a great headset, comfortable, loaded with flashy tech, and comes with what might be my favorite VR controllers ever. Unfortunately, as nice a ride PSVR2 is, it doesn't have a ton of road to drive on. The PSVR2's current library includes some great games, but it's small compared to everything you'll find on PC, and lacking backwards compatibility, older games that I think plenty of PSVR2 entrants would like to try are, as of now, locked to the original PSVR. That's a tough enough sell without considering that PSVR2 costs more than the PS5 itself. And while Meta's standalone catalog may be similar, the company's investment in PC VR and its relatively low-cost standalone headsets make it an easy entry point into VR with what may be the biggest library of VR games around. If you want to include the VR modding scene and community-driven apps like SideQuest, there may be an argument that a Quest 2 or 3 gives you the best bang for your buck, if not at least from a content standpoint. But if PlayStation invested more heavily in VR, not just for PSVR 2, but also for PC, what kind of effect would that have? How would the dynamics of the market shift, and what would it mean for the medium? Making the PSVR2-PC compatible, I think, would be a nice touch, but regardless of the technical and economic possibilities of a move like that, PC compatibility isn't even the most important thing, and neither is trying to ship more units than Meta. Meta's head start with headsets won't be beat, at least not for a while. No, games, I think, are the most important thing. It is not difficult to imagine VR iterations, or even VR remakes, of a lot of PlayStation titles. Last of Us and Uncharted are, I think, two franchises that could lend themselves particularly well to VR. Horizon Call of the Mountain is not great, but its problems are not inherent to VR. Call of the Mountain's problems are literally of its own design. A better VR Horizon game is not difficult to imagine. In 2019, Sony acquired Insomniac, who would go on to release Stormland, an Oculus exclusive, later that year. Stormland has a lot of killer ideas, and remains one of the most unique VR games I've played. The Quest 2's success created a market that I think, at least in some ways, forced developers to adapt to it, but with retention struggles and a company for whom VR gaming is tangential to its overall mission, I wonder if the bigger audience Meta provides, and provided, cannot sustain itself in the same way a market created specifically for and focused on VR gaming could. Yes, this is all much easier said than done. PlayStation and its studios all have plans and current projects of their own, even if some of PlayStation's plans are less exciting than others. Naughty Dog, I assume, can't just drop something and pivot to putting Nathan Drake in VR, but those are just PlayStation's first-party studios. Are there any smaller VR devs out there with solid portfolios that could benefit from a PlayStation publishing deal? I have to imagine there are. What's Stress Level Zero doing nowadays? I don't know, I'm just spitballing here. I'd understand anyone that sees PlayStation's VR prospects at this point as a lost cause, and if all Sony made was hardware, I'd probably see it the same way. If the PSVR 2 market isn't lucrative enough to turn the headset into a profitable venture for Sony, then would publishing and financing VR games for both PC and PSVR 2 help? If a multi-platform strategy is working for PlayStation's flat-screen business, then why couldn't something similar be done for VR? If Assassin's Creed Nexus wasn't a Meta exclusive, if it were shown off in State of Plays, if it had banner ads on the PlayStation Store, if it was part of a PlayStation subscription service or had a wider multi-platform release, could that have changed its fortunes? I understand companies can't just press a button and make things like this happen overnight, but conceptually, would it not be better for VR if it had the full force of a brand like PlayStation behind it? A brand that is, yes, part of a larger company, but at least one where the user experience and product is game-centric. The future of VR is indeterminate, and despite Meta's success, I think up for grabs. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Valve, whose plans and bottomless cash flow represent a pretty big unsolved and unpredictable variable for VR. What Meta's success with the Quest 2 shows us, I think, is that people are interested in VR, if not at least curious, and I would diagnose the pessimistic market predictions and retention problems as a game and company problem. Meta is not a video game company, and it's not a well-liked company. Public disdain once got it to change its very name. Mark Zuckerberg is unlikable, and you know what? I don't think he's ever actually played Arizona Sunshine. In their 2023 fourth quarter earnings report, Meta's Reality Labs division once again posted a loss, and this time it was a record. What could be done if, rather than investing in the next internet, a worse adult version of Roblox, and laying off tons of employees to increase efficiency, Meta tossed some money at Drifter and had them make Lies Beneath 2. Hey, a man can dream. Again, I'm not making the case that Sony is somehow more virtuous or better than Meta. All companies suck, they are all bad, but PlayStation has a much longer track record of fostering quality games made by quality studios. That's a big part of what PlayStation's done for the last decade. Meta might be king, but they're a weak and distracted monarch, trying to ham-fist their priorities into a technology war may not work, while underserving the one technology we know VR does extremely well. Has the VR market already calcified? Has everyone that wants a VR headset already bought one? That's tough to tell. But I also wonder how platform exclusivity and a lack of games from major publishers and of popular IPs has suppressed interest in VR for both new entrants and those already with a headset.